So, uh, have you ever stopped to really think about what consciousness actually is? I mean, does it feel like this smooth, flowing river of thought, an unbroken stream from one moment to the next?
Or maybe something else entirely.
Exactly. Today on the deep dive, we're diving into a really mind-bending idea.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, this surprising convergence of, well, ancient Buddhist meditative wisdom and cutting-edge cognitive science. And they seem to agree on something pretty radical,
Which
that
is
our consciousness isn't this seamless river we imagine. It's more like um, a collection of discrete, rapidly flickering moments.
like a strobe light, maybe, not a continuous flow.
That's a great way to put it. A strobe light, not a river. We're unpacking this paper by Skylar Fiction, Discreteness of Consciousness and the Modular Mind. Insights from Vipassana and Cognitive Science.
Mm-hmm. It pulls together philosophy, meditation practice like Vipassana, and modern neuroscience.
Right. And our mission here is to explore what this actually means, for understanding our minds, challenging that gut feeling about who we are, ourself.
And even how we might design things like AI in the future. Big implications.
Huge. So, okay, let's get into it. What if that stream of consciousness isn't a stream at all, but more like a series of mental snapshots?
Well, it's a real challenge to our basic experience, isn't it? I mean, for centuries, you've got classical philosophy and just, well, our own intuition telling us consciousness is smooth, unbroken awareness.
Yeah, you just feel like your thoughts flow one into the next, like that river metaphor everyone uses.
Exactly. But this paper, it flips that. It argues consciousness is actually modular and discrete,
Mhm.
made up of these distinct mental events, frames, they call them.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't just philosophers arguing in armchairs. This exact idea pops up in two fields that seem worlds apart.
Precisely. So on one hand, you have ancient insights from Vipassana meditation.
Right, that's a core practice in Theravada Buddhism, focused on insight, clear seeing.
Yeah, exactly. And through Vipassana, practitioners are essentially trained to observe directly that experience doesn't just flow. It actually arises as well, a rapid sequence of distinct events or mental moments. They call these citta.
Citta, okay.
Right.
And isn't there something in Buddhist psychology, the Abhidhamma, that actually tries to quantify this? Like puts a number on it?
That's right, yeah. It suggests consciousness happens in this incredibly fast series, something like 17 discrete mind moments for every single perception.
17 for one perception, wow.
Yeah, it's lightning fast. And that speed creates the illusion of continuity.
Ah, okay, so it's like those old film reels,
Right.
individual static frames, but they flash by so quickly your brain just sees smooth motion.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And what's wild is that modern cognitive science finds echoes of the very same thing.
Really? How so?
Well, neuroscientific evidence suggests our perception also operates in discrete frames, flashing at frequencies around, say, 13 times per second, 13 hertz.
So our brains are basically taking snapshots of reality 13 times a second.
Pretty much. Researchers like Van Rollen and Koch have done work on this. It's like a super fast slideshow presenting reality to us, and we don't even notice the gaps between the slides.
Okay, so it's not this fluid stream, it's more like a computer processing things in distinct chunks. But how do you even start to connect these two worlds? Ancient meditation and modern brain scans, they seem so different.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's where this axiomatic model from Barendregt and Raffone comes in. It's a way to define consciousness functionally.
Functionally, meaning.
Meaning it describes what consciousness does, rather than getting bogged down in defining what it is metaphysically. It basically says, at any tiny discrete moment in time, ki or te, your consciousness is in a specific configuration, C, a unique state of awareness.
So like a mathematical description of a mind moment.
In a way, yes. It offers a computable description. And what's really striking is how this formal, logical model lines up so well with what Vipassana meditators report finding through introspection. It gives us a language, a modern, testable framework to talk about those ancient mind moments.
A computable model of consciousness that really messes with your everyday sense of things, doesn't it? Especially something like time. You mentioned Vipassana offers a way to experience this directly.
Yes, practitioners who sustain their observation over time often report experiencing the granular nature of thoughts and sensations directly.
Granular, like breaking down.
Exactly. Take physical pain. It might start feeling like a solid, constant ache, but with focused attention, it can start to break down into distinct waves or pulses or flickers. It loses its solidity.
Huh. And does that happen with time itself?
It seems so. The experience of time itself can become deconstructed. Instead of that smooth flow, meditators might encounter staccato bursts of experience. This is a direct encounter with aneke impermanence. The feeling is that time isn't some fixed external clock ticking away.
Wow. So if that's the experience,
Yeah.
what does it actually mean for how we perceive time? If it's not this external river, are we making it up, constructing it internally?
That's precisely the argument Barendregt and Raffone make. Time doesn't exist out there, separate from consciousness. It arises within consciousness. It's fundamentally a memory of change between configurations.
A memory of change.
Yeah. Even Western thinkers, like the mathematician L.E.J. Brouwer, talked about a primordial intuition of time coming from our internal perception of succession, how we notice one moment following another.
And Vipassana taps into that directly.
It appears so. As meditative depth increases, people often report entering timeless states. Not because time literally stops, but because that internal construction of succession, that feeling of then this, it just dissolves.
Okay, so time is a construction that's huge, but then what about the self? The I that experiences all this. That leads us right into the Buddhist idea of anatta, right? Non-self.
Absolutely. Anatta suggests that what we call self isn't some solid, unchanging thing having experiences. It's more like a bundle of interdependent processes happening moment by moment.
Processes like.
Sensation, perception, thoughts or mental formations, volition, and consciousness itself, the five aggregates they're called. They arise, they cease, constantly changing, and crucially, there's no central controller pulling the strings, no little me sitting in the control room.
That resonates with Shiah's non-self theory mentioned in the paper. The self is a construction born of clinging and conceptual grasping.
Exactly, or a psychological illusion born from desire, memory, and identification. We basically latch onto patterns, string memories together, desire certain outcomes, and build this story of me.
And if we link this back to the modular mind idea,
It completely destabilizes that traditional picture of a single, unified, enduring self. The ego, from this perspective, is what happens when we desperately try to maintain that illusion of coherence, trying to force those discrete frames into one continuous movie starring me.
and again, it's not just an Eastern idea. Western cognitive science seems to be saying something similar.
It really does. Cognitive science often views the mind as a collection of specialized, functionally distinct subsystems, modules. Think of Jerry Fodor's work here, or even more extreme views like the massive modularity hypothesis from Carruthers, suggesting almost everything the mind does is handled by specialized modules.
Like different apps running on a phone, each doing its own thing.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. So that feeling of a smooth stream of consciousness isn't a single stream at all. It's more like the output of this complex patchwork system coordinating discrete modules. And the illusion of self emerges from that coordination.
And Daniel Dennett's idea fits here too, the center of narrative gravity.
Perfect fit. Dennett argues the self isn't a thing, not an entity in your head. It's more like an abstract point, a center of gravity around which we organize our experiences, our memories, our plans. It's the protagonist in the story we tell ourselves about ourselves.
But it's just the story, not a real entity.
Right. And both paths, Buddhist meditation and cognitive science, suggest that if you can somehow dismantle the scaffolding, the constant storytelling, the clinging to memories, that center collapses. What's revealed is something much more dynamic, fragmented, maybe even impersonal. It's a powerful convergence.
It really is. Okay, so we have these two powerful approaches, this deep introspective practice and this objective scientific analysis. How do we actually, bridge them? It's like you said, they're looking at the same thing, just through totally different lenses.
Yeah, exactly. And the paper argues they can actually inform each other. Vipassana acts as a kind of discipline of first-person phenomenology. It's a method for directly observing and isolating these mental events from the inside.
The subjective experience.
Right. And then Barendregt and Raffone's axiomatic model provides the objective modeling framework using logic and computability. It gives us a way to describe the structure they're both finding, but from the outside in formal terms.
So they can translate between each other.
That's the fascinating idea.
Mm-hmm.
There's potentially a direct mapping. The Buddhist citta, that momentary flicker of consciousness that maps onto the axiomatic Kate configuration, that specific state of awareness at time at.
Okay, wow.
And those subtle shifts in awareness people experience in meditation, becoming more focused or more open or less identified, These could correspond to system-level transitions between different configurations in the model.
And the cognitive modules, like the parts of the brain dealing with vision or language.
You can think of those as the subcomponents, the underlying hardware, perhaps, that gets activated or integrated into these global states, these lock configurations. The system selectively activates and combines these modular outputs moment by moment.
Are we actually seeing proof of this in the brain, like with brain scans?
We're starting to see confirming evidence, yeah. Brain imaging studies on experienced meditators, people like Antoine Letts and his colleagues have done important work here, show changes in brain activity and even structure.
Changes where?
In regions linked to attention, how we perceive time, and significantly, the default mode network.
That's the network that's active when our minds are wandering, thinking about ourselves.
That's the one. And experienced meditators often show reduced activity there during meditation and changes in its connectivity. It supports the idea that meditation literally alters the architecture of consciousness. It seems to help reveal and maybe even modulate this discrete modular nature.
So the brain starts functioning differently.
The analogy used is that it becomes less like a noisy broadcast system and more like a high-resolution clock, more precise, less caught up in that continuous, often self-referential chatter.
That brings up a really interesting point you raised earlier. If the unity people feel in deep meditation isn't about literally fusing everything together, but more about accepting the multiplicity, what does that imply for just, regular life?
It's a profound shift in perspective. Shiah's non-self theory touches on this too, the idea that the ego dissolves when one ceases to identify with the outputs of cognitive modules.
So you stop believing that you are your thoughts or you are your feelings.
Exactly. You see them as processes arising and passing. And from that perspective, things like compassion and mindfulness aren't just sort of nice ethical goals. They become cognitive shifts that naturally arise when you see the fragmented, constructed nature of the self.
So that feeling of unity isn't forcing everything into one box.
No, it's more like unity through acceptance of multiplicity, not denial of it. You see all the parts, all the flickers, all the modules, without needing to impose a single solid me on top of it all. It's a very different kind of wholeness.
Which leads us to maybe the boldest question raised by all this. If consciousness really is modular, discrete, and potentially computable, could we actually design consciousness?
That's the provocative edge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe not design a sentient being like us necessarily, but could we emulate or engineer conscious-like states?
Based on this understanding. So what would that mean for AI, for example?
Well, it reframes the goal. Instead of trying to build an AI with a stable, unified self, which might be based on a flawed model of our own minds anyway, maybe designers could focus on systems that function as sequences of attentional configurations.
Meaning
Systems that are receptive, adaptive, situated in their environment, processing information in discrete states or frames, much like this model suggests we do.
So machines that could approximate awareness, as the paper puts it, maybe through having a similar structure to human cognition.
Potentially. Creating what the philosopher Thomas Metzinger calls a phenomenal model of the intentional self. Basically an AI that functions in a way that mirrors the structure of human awareness, even if its internal experience, its qualia, is completely different or non-existent.
Okay, but if we start going down that road, accepting this modular, non-self architecture, how should that guide us? Ethically, I mean.
That's the crucial question. Elizabeth Buie talks about something called peripheral design, approaching consciousness indirectly.
How does that work?
Designing systems with subtle affordances for presence, detection, and transformation. Not trying to replicate consciousness head-on, but creating environments or tools that subtly nudge users towards certain states.
Could you get an example?
Maybe an interface designed to mimic meditation. Perhaps it intentionally slows down input, reduces distractions, encourages pauses. Or think of a digital assistant designed not for maximum engagement and addictive loops.
Which is how most seem designed now.
Right. But one modeled instead on anicca, on impermanence. Maybe it encourages disengagement, reminds you that tasks or states are temporary.
That's a radical shift. The paper even mentions this idea of an open source architecture for consciousness where people could, reprogram their own experience.
It's a speculative endpoint, echoing that Buddhist aim of training the mind. If experience is constructed moment by moment based on these configurations, could we learn to consciously shift those configurations? It's out there, but it follows the logic.
But there has to be a huge note of caution here, right?
Absolutely critical caution. Consciousness, subjectivity, it's not neutral territory. It's deeply tied to our values, our embodiment, our emotions. Trying to reduce the self purely to code, to modules and configuration,
You risk losing something vital.
you risk erasing the complexity of embodied emotional life, as the paper warns. And we have to remember what figures like Nyanaponika Thera stressed. Imitating awareness is not the same as living it. Meditation aims for direct seeing, free of conceptual distortion. That's very different from building a simulation.
So if we ever do venture into designing systems inspired by this, how do we keep it grounded?
That's the ongoing challenge. How do we ensure any such design prioritizes human dignity, transparency, and genuine care for well-being, rather than just optimizing a computational model? It's a conversation we need to have very carefully.
Wow, what an incredible journey, really, into the heart of our own minds. We started thinking about a simple river and ended up with, well, flickering strobes, modular minds, constructed time, maybe even computable awareness.
It certainly challenges that intuitive sense of a solid, continuous self. Both the ancient wisdom and the modern science seem to point towards consciousness being this incredibly dynamic, fragmented, momentary process.
Yeah. The self, it turns out, isn't really a thing you possess. It's more like a process you are.
A constantly unfolding process.
And processes, well, they can be observed, understood, maybe even changed, whether you explore that through focusing on your breath or by building an algorithm. The challenge, I suppose, is if we do try to change or design these moments, we need to do it wisely.
Design the moments well. That's a good way to put it.
So maybe something for you, the listener, to reflect on. What does your own consciousness feel like? Is it a river? Is it a strobe? And how might seeing it differently change your understanding of yourself and maybe how you interact with the world?